loud enough. Well, anyway. Can I have apologies, please, Pippa?
Yes, we have apologies from Councillor Federica Smith-Roberts, Councillor Simon McComb, Councillor Raj Sood, and also Councillor Cara Levan, but she is joining online.
Nomination for chair, please.
I'd like to nominate Julie Knight, please.
Linda?
I'll second that.
We have a show of hands. Julie? Can I have a nomination for vice chair, please?
I'll do that too, please. Ash, please, as vice chair.
Thanks, Andy.
I'd like to second Ash. I'm sure he'll do a really good job.
A show of hands. There are no other nominations. Yeah, Beryl.
Thank you. I was conscious I was supposed to nominate Ash, but I was too busy making sure that I didn't knock my my name to sign over. So apologies. Thank you, and good morning and welcome. It seems a little bit strange now after 5 years sitting in the hot seat, and it's been kept nice and warm by Heather, who I will take an opportunity to embarrass in a few moments' time. But if we just plough through the agenda. Item 4, public question time. We've had no statements or questions, so we can move straight through to item 5 about the panel membership report, which Pat will introduce.
This report's in 2 parts, and the first part deals with the councillor membership, and that's unchanged following, I think it was a by-election in Somerset and some really minor political churn across your councils. There was no impact on the current allocation of seats on the panel, and I haven't been notified of any changes to appointees from the individual councils. So if in the first instance, could you just agree the membership for the year ahead, please? Agreed? Thank you. Now, the second part of the report is for discussion, and it concerns the independent member vacancy that's arisen as a result of Richard Brown completing his 8-year term on the panel. So the statutory minimum number of independent members that panels have to have is 2. We've operated 3 for some time. Now, the panel has a choice of operating a vacancy for the last 2 years, or the alternative proposal, which we touched on at the pre-meeting, is to conduct a skills audit of the membership across the board and to place a more targeted advert in the hope of recruiting someone who's going to fill any skills and gaps that are currently on the panel. And to be honest with you, in terms of the guidance, it's exactly what the guidance states that co-optees are for, is to ensure that you're covered across the board, and co-optees should be recruited to fill any gaps in skills. It's for you to decide, though.
Okay, thank you. Heather?
Hi, thanks very much, and thanks to all the people who are involved in putting the applications, the pack out and coming into the interview. It did a really good job. It was awful not to be able to recruit somebody. We've all been in that place before and we don't like it, but it's much better not to take somebody on if they're not right. And I think we've had a bit of a discussion, and I think my instinct would be we'll give it one more shot in a very targeted way, but the point we have to be very careful with is we've only got 2 years left. And the other thing I think to say is that if we don't get anything sorted in a sense before we meet again, it might be worth just leaving it. Because on the one hand, I think it's right that we can choose. We've got an opportunity to fill a skills gap, and I think that's important. But I don't want to make anyone think that, well, my skills aren't relevant, therefore they want to find somebody else. It's not that. We bring a lot of skills. around this table already, which is super. So if we end up with just the 16 that we have now, I wouldn't be unhappy about that. But it gives us one more chance just to be absolutely sure, because we've got a particularly hard set of work to do in the next 2 years. So having the right people around the table would make a lot of sense. So I think I'd be happy to support the idea of having one more go, but not beyond September.
Thank you. Does anybody have any further views on that? Happy to try again with a view to getting somebody on in September if successful? Fantastic, thank you. So that report's noted. If we move on to item 6 around declarations, page 15 to 18, there is a short paper reminding members of declaring declarations of interest. Do anybody have any queries about the content of that paper? Lisa?
Thanks. Do I need to, so my declaration of interest that I work for an organisation that's mentioned a few times in the papers today, SARSAS. So I don't know if I need to say that at this point in the meeting.
That's great, thank you. And in that respect, does anybody else have any declarations of interest they feel they need to raise for today? No, fantastic. We'll move on to the minutes, item 7. There are 2 sets of meetings in our pack. Page 19 talks about the 2nd of March session where we held the confirmation hearing. Is there any changes that need to be made for those, or can we sign them off as a correct record? Yeah, agreed. And the second set was for panel meeting on March the 24th from page 25. Can we confirm those are a correct record? Yeah, wonderful. And moving on to matters arising, there were 5 actions from the last meeting. Thank you very much for the update on all of those actions. I note that actions 1 and 2 talk about the data from the OPCC that's been added to the report, so perhaps we can cover that when we get to that point. I think we just needed some clarification around number 3, because it talks about a data issue. I can't remember which member it was that raised about the seizure of the bikes. And I think there was an issue with constabulary data.
Yeah, it was the issue of scooters. And yes, Ben has obviously been chasing this one down, and it is about what is recorded at the time or not recorded. And so it's about, there's a lot of not being recorded accurately, and Ben can come in if he wants to correct what I'm saying. But so it is an issue. So we can't provide accurate data on that. Ben, do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, just to add, this is an issue which the constabulary have been trying to resolve for a number of years. As you know, the previous commissioner used to talk about it, and so they'd started looking into it even then. And I spoke to the team involved in it more recently as a result of this action. They just say because of the inconsistency in how those e-scooters are booked into the system, they can't get accurate numbers. They did think about other options like the invoicing from the company that obviously would take them and destroy them. But then they said that's done in slightly different ways and wouldn't give an accurate picture. It would be slightly misleading to rely on that information. That's why it was felt better not to give a number, because anything that came up with just might not be accurate effectively. Less than ideal, I know, but the lead has tried to unpick this a couple of times, but just not been able to get what they want out of it.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure who raised that originally, but whoever did, if they're in the room, is there anything they wanted to add to that? Okay, thank you. We'll move forward. Oh, Sibs.
I had a separate point that wasn't in the action pack, which was about getting a bit more insight into the expenditure for AI and digital technology. Seeing that number of spending items were quite high on the use of AI or the use of technology. So it would be useful for us to get a bit more insight as to exactly what is that going to resolve and everything else.
Thank you, Sibs. Is that something you raised at the last meeting? Okay. Is that something that we should have added into the notes? Okay, thank you. So, did you get that? Yeah, thank you. So moving to Chair's business, I think it's really wise for me to just look over towards Heather and try not to publicly embarrass her, but by just saying that certainly from all my time on the panel, Heather has been our very, very able chair. And I've certainly learned a lot in terms of the way you've run things. We've had a presentation for Heather privately this morning, and said all our thanks through emails, as well as culminating this morning with saying, just the way that you've carried us through very diligently, very professionally, with a whole load of commitment. I can only scratch the surface of what I've actually seen you do over the last 3 years, and I'm pretty sure that you will be a hotline for me over the next coming days, weeks, months, and for that I thank you. But I think on behalf of the panel, we just want to say a huge resounding thank you for steering us through with such professionalism and such commitment, and doing it in a very kind way. Thank you, Heather.
I just be really, I'm not going to take up much time. We never have enough time in these meetings. So I just want to say the content of more of my emails out to my friends and colleagues around the table was just how much their being here around the table made my job as chair much easier. So you'll have an easy time, Julie. It'll be easy because you've got a really good gang. I mean, there's somebody from Somerset who's now going to be a bit itchy, but apart from that, but I'll be there to help. And I just also wanted to say, thank you obviously to Pippa and to Pat. I always say Pippa and Pat and Pippa. Both marvels, absolutely marvels, and I think it's really we couldn't do it without them. And just to say, I'm absolutely determined. If they'll have me, I'll stay on the budget monitoring, the budget task and finish group. And I think what's really important, obviously, I'll be here at the side as long as I'm here, making sure that we spend time focusing on what happens next and ensuring that goes as smoothly as possible. And I'll shut up now, but I'll just say one last thing. Somebody very wise said very recently that. Relationships are the infrastructure, and they are, and that's the most important thing. So I'm sure this panel has done a really good job up until all the time I've been here from 2019. I've seen it to keep the relationships right and keep the relationships right with the panel and the OPCC, our colleagues and friends in the OPCC. That critical friend, that challenge, that's our job. And I know everyone here works really well. So yeah, you made it easy. That's right. It was easy for me to do. It's a great gang. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you again, Heather. And secondly, I'd like to thank Ash for agreeing to sit next to me for the coming year. Obviously did some sweet talking there. And to be remiss of me not to acknowledge the fact that we've got somebody who's absent today, who served on the panel on and off, I think, as a councillor, as well as an independent member, Richard Brown, who sadly hasn't been able to make the last couple of meetings, but had hoped to be here today, but can't, but will be saying goodbye formally. And a big thank you to him in September. But I believe he's back to work now. So that's really good news for Richard. He will be missed, and we'll formally thank him for his service when we see him in September. One other thing I wanted to raise in Chair's business, I did cover it at the pre-meet, but wise to go through it now, was to talk about the frontline consultancy and the offer for us to get involved in their annual membership for their regional networks, which offers 2 opportunities throughout the year to network with our regional partners around the panels. So that'll be September and March, as well as a national opportunity to engage. I don't know whether that's in person or virtually, but we can find out, as well as offering an access helpline for panels for any queries or anything like that. Given the changes that are on the horizon and they're not too far away, we kind of thought that that was a good idea in terms of a £420 plus VAT spend. Can I just see if everybody's still in agreement around the table for that? It sounds like a good idea, so we'll move forward with that. And the invitation for those getting involved at the 2 regional meetings, it's not just the chair and vice chair. We'll open it up to anybody else who wants to take part as well. So more on that coming soon. So that concludes anything I wanted to cover on the chair's business. If we can move now to item 10. Oh, Heather?
Only really a quick one. Would people mind if we put the lights on? I mean, it's lovely, but it's a bit gloomy.
Thank you. We've got the sun in the room. Thank you. So item 10, the work programme. I'm going to hand over to Pat to introduce the report.
It emerges from the annual planning meeting and discussions with the OPCC, and it's presented to the AGM every year for agreement. So if I could just quickly take each of the recommendations in turn, it's housekeeping more than anything else. Can we agree the meeting date set out in the report?
Yep.
Can we agree the budget task group will be the existing members, Councillor Shearer, Councillor Crewe, Councillor Waite and Councillor Cartman? Can we agree the complaints subcommittee members remain Councillor Smith-Roberts, Councillor Whale and Councillor Laven, and that Gary Davis remains the lead member for complaints? Yeah.
Thank you. Staying on that report, if we can just cover off from pages 44 and also on 49, just looking at the proactive scrutiny areas, and then I'll open it up for discussion. So I know we've talked about the implementation plan over the course of the last 18 months or so, and we understand from Carl's presentation recently that that will be absorbed into your business plan, and we have said in our report that the panel looks forward to hearing more progress about that. Hopefully you may have something for us today which may be of interest in terms of timescales or how that work is moving. Thank you very much. And we do understand it's a fluid process. And HMICRFS, if I've pronounced that correctly, the inspectorate. Once again, a huge thank you for the standalone report that we had in December. I think I could speak on behalf of the panel that we found that incredibly useful, because up until that point, in terms of HMICRFS, the updates felt a bit kind of lost in the weight of your update reports because of the wealth of all the other activity in there. And the inspectorate updates in terms of the GSB, so your governance scrutiny board, of course, whilst they're interesting, it felt like it's a bit of a snapshot. So what the panel I think would welcome is more updates in terms of a regular report, just following on from the one that you've done, just keep the panel briefed, and maybe twice a year something that's a little bit meatier, so we can see not just around Peel, because it's great that you're hearing the forward questions that are going to be asked in terms of preparedness, but all the other inspections going on in the background in terms of areas for improvement, recommendations, and where we currently stand on particularly systemic things that have been raised that the inspectorate has said this is an ongoing issue. I think it'll be really good to raise that together in a report in its own right. Welcome your thoughts.
Thank you, Julie, and congratulations. I was going to come back to this later, but as it's my first chance to speak, I also want to say thank you to Heather for, you've been the chair, obviously in my short tenure relative to your longer tenure in the panel. And as you say, relationships are really important, that critical friend role, but being able to raise issues and then one hopes resolve them. I've appreciated the chance to work with you, and I'm looking forward to working with you, Julie. So, on the Peel, can we look at that and how it would work in practice, because it's not a fast-moving area in the sense of Peel happens every 4 years. So doing kind of 6 monthly reports on Peel, the AFIs, we are there has been some movement recently, and we're anticipating more in coming weeks, but that doesn't mean that we will have 6 monthly kind of updates, if you like. They do feature in the Commissioner's report, but there's an additional factor that we've got, which is the performance frameworks, the police performance framework that is coming in, and we will get the first report of that in July, which we will bring to the September meeting. So there's a combination of the Peel AFIs, of which there are potentially 3 outstanding AFIs. Then we will have this performance framework with 4 levels in it, which will be we believe quarterly reporting. We've just had recent update on dates for the framework publication, so goodness knows what it'll actually look like in reality. So there's going to be a complexity around that performance monitoring of the police in any event. So I think we need to work through how that is reported to you, albeit it is reported to you at each meeting, that combination of Peel and the performance framework as well.
Thank you.
With the time that goes on in the meetings, that we wind up just doing the Peel and then not covering other pieces as well, but happy to work through that one.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it was a little bit wider than Peel because of all the other inspection programmes that are in place as well, and any areas for improvement or recommendations coming out of those. I think it was just a case of sometimes I think we feel they're a little bit missed or lost at the back of the report. So it was just kind of bringing them to the fore a little bit more. So thank you for that. It'd be interesting to see how the developments move forward for September. And we welcome the report that's coming on that in terms of the performance element. So moving forward to September's meeting, the scrutiny focus there, communications and engagement strategy, and a report on the new performance framework, and to include the update a year on from your response to the public confidence report from the subcommittee. Then moving forward to December, the usual budget scrutiny, as well as the MPG, so the neighbourhood policing guarantee, and the new geographic model, because we understand it would have been a year in place. And we're particularly interested to hear an update on how that's meeting its aims in terms of improving leadership and visibility, and strengthening the partnership working and enhancing the collaboration across the local policing functions. And February, precept only in terms of hearing the Commissioner's proposal, and March, exploring male violence against women and girls, and looking for assurances around how the safeguarding is being managed in terms of BRAG and DASH, the processes involved, as well as technical and cyber-enabled offending, safety in public spaces, which I think was covered a little bit in your reports today, as well as nighttime economy and transport, as well as your campaign as well about non-fatal strangulation, and anything else that comes out of the work that you're doing on a national level. Just opening it up to members now, do we think that we've captured the areas for scrutiny that you'd like to focus on for the coming year? Lisa?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks for including VORG on the work programme again this year. Just it's an area that's always kind of new and emerging challenges. And I know we've looked at it previously, but it's not an issue that's going anywhere fast. And I think it's really important to keep it on the agenda and stay on top of the issues like tech facilitated abuse and drug facilitated sexual assault, so that it's an ongoing focus alongside all the other really serious issues that we have to consider. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Does anybody else wish to raise anything from the pack? No. Wonderful. Okay, that's our programme going forward. And item number 11, performance report and the supplementary pack. You can see that we brought it forward to give it the focus that it deserves. And we note and thank you very much for the additional data pack that includes some of the things that we've been asking for in terms of additional measures around the police and crime plan outcomes, and the section that members have asked for in terms of outcomes. So if I can hand over to you to introduce your report.
Thank you very much. And yeah, thank you for the comments on the additional information as well. So just picking up on some key pieces in the performance report. Firstly, on victims measures. And as you'll see from the report, there's a mixed picture in here. You can imagine I am concerned about the decline in results from the victim satisfaction survey. So, we need further assurance around that and what's happening with that. But separately, we do see improvements on the victim-based crime outcomes. So, they're indicative indicators. Thank you, Carl. The ability to speak has suddenly abandoned me. So that was what I wanted to pick up on in terms of victim measures. On the VORG-related data, then due to the link between football tournaments and domestic abuse that we see, which is quite often driven by the alcohol rather than the sport, but it is alongside that those events. A 4P plan has been developed to strengthen the response during the World Cup Men's Foot World Cup, I hasten to add. It includes the temporary standing up of what was called Op Balearic again, which is where IDVAs go out with officers, and that is, it proves really useful both for the officer learning as well as the response to victims. There's also new collaboration with courts listing team, CPS and ISVA service to improve case progression. Again, ensuring victim voice is represented in that, and prioritising the risk, as you were talking about earlier as well. The point is that risk evaluation is useful and used. So that matters. And testing of an automated niche robot that flags stalking cases as well, and improving on that recognition as the super complaint and other reports around stalking and harassment. I mentioned a minute ago the new police performance system, and the most important note is on this is that police forces will be placed into one of 4 levels. There are, kind of different areas of, definitions for those 4 levels. But as you'll see, well, the timeline that's in the report has actually been updated since you had the papers. So forces will be notified of the level on the 13th of July, and then the level will be made public on the 16th of July. There are issues around that, in all honesty, because as with Peel, there's questions of accuracy, and you then get a chance to have a dialogue about the assumptions of accuracy and what's been measured. But those 3 days obviously don't give you a chance to reflect on that. There's also a confidential dashboard, but that is classified as kind of confidential, if you like, internal use only. But we can provide the data that is publicly available. The final point on that specifically is that since we last met, there has also been this most similar forces change, which has come from the Home Office. Avon and Somerset has been one of the most impacted forces with regards to that change from the previous most similar group comparators. I will say, and I have said to anyone that will listen, that if you just do a finger in the air test, if you do a sniff test around the most similar forces group that Avon and Somerset has been put into, it does not make sense. There are forces that we have a core city. We also have a large rural area. We have coastal towns. There are all sorts of ways that we have differences. If you look at the most similar force group we've been put into, it's Cheshire, it's Gloucestershire, it's Wiltshire, along with other forces. We still have Hampshire, but it doesn't, in my view, reflect accurately the forces that that Avon and Somerset are most similar to. The Chief Constable and I jointly wrote to the Home Office to raise our concerns about this. I also raised it in an APCC meeting I raised it with colleagues who are on the working group. I raised it in an At5 meeting, which is where the APCC had a Home Office spokesperson on that, raised concerns with that, had a separate meeting with the lead Home Office official on this, about our concerns. As a consequence of that meeting, we knew they weren't going to change the forces, but we are waiting, and I've just messaged this morning to see if it's come in. It hadn't come in at the end of last week. Waiting for agreed wording with the Home Office about what the MSF measures will be used for, and that it would only be used for specific crime type comparators, and what the ability would be to actually measure against national measures as opposed to MSF measures, how it would work in the performance framework as well, because we've had mixed messages about that. But as I say, we have raised, I have been raising significant challenges around this, because I think, I think the problem with the way the Home Office have done with this is a foundational problem in terms of the foundational measures they have used to do the comparator. And then once they have done, if that was their starting point, then obviously you're simply multiplying the problem at that kind of level. And it does not take, if you're looking at averages, it doesn't take account of systems. And the system point that Avon and Somerset, if you have, the example, if you have a temperature of 40 degrees in Bristol and 20 degrees in, or 0 degrees in Minehead, if you dress for 20 degrees, you're not dressed properly for any end of that. The system has to work as a system. So that is, a real challenge that we've raised with the Home Office. We're waiting for that wording to see how that will be accurately taking account of the concerns that we have raised. But I promise you, we've raised it.
Thank you. Did you want to bring Ben in at all for anything in the performance pack?
I think I won't get into any of the specific data now. I know you have questions. It was just to highlight within that supplementary data, we've, as well as you noted, Julie, we've got the KPIs that we'd already designed that align to the police and crime plan. We've got the positive outcomes, both numbers and rates, but also then the middle section there is trying to bring in some of that data that aligns to the national framework, given what Claire has said about the dashboard that the sector has access to, that we can't draw public or put information into the public domain from. That's why we've tried to bring in some of those measures where we can either access nationally available data that's already in the public, or kind of using proxy local measures for some of those things that are in the crime survey for England and Wales, for example. So that's what that middle section of data is there. And just to pick up on the most similar force group, I know it might sound slightly technical, but that right group can provide a really insightful comparison, because just comparing at a national level, when you've got 43 very different forces, it doesn't necessarily give you a lot. But the most similar force group we've always found to be a more useful comparator, hence why we use it in some of our performance reports. And I know questions have often come up here of how do we compare to that most similar group. And given that the Home Office has said it will be used in very limited circumstances, that's fine in theory, but we know in practice, as soon as there is a group called a most similar force group, the caveats around, oh, you should only use it for this very specific reason, just get completely lost in translation, and people will automatically draw those comparisons. Hence why the PCC and the Chief have wanted to make their views very clear that we don't feel that it's an appropriate group to represent performance. And that becomes even more stark given that we are, now this isn't the language that the Home Office or anyone else officially would want to use, we are now going to have a league table of police forces. That's the reality of it. Every force is going to be put into one of 4 levels, so there will be a league table, and therefore they start becoming comparisons between them. So yeah, it's just to emphasise why we feel that's so important that that should be looked into. But other than that, I'll throw open to any questions around the data itself.
Okay, thank you. I know we've got some questions. I'll start with Gary, then Heather, then come to Ash.
I was just trying to get down into the detail of victim satisfaction and whether there's more detail in why people are less and less satisfied, and a fairly significant downturn in the last quarter, and any issues that are emerging there.
Yeah, so on that, so in terms of the answer to why the last quarter specifically, I don't know. But one of the things that's been a constant theme when we've looked at this and had conversations with the constabulary around it has been the follow-up part of it. So usually the initial contact and early contact with the whether that's control room officers is generally viewed well by victims. But it's that follow-up, including victim contact, and that's something that we've discussed at GSB and the constabulary have commented on themselves, is that is inconsistent is the best word. Sometimes you'll get officers who do that really well, really think about the victim, and that it's throughout their investigation in terms of how they need to keep them updated. And then in other cases, it really is the bare minimum, and they don't say a lot other than, you know, the major signposts of, say, if there was a charge coming through or things like that. So there is a lot of inconsistency across, and that's something, again, we've discussed at GSB, and the constabulary within their own management board recognise there's this inconsistency across different teams. So for me, a key part of that is trying to bring up those least well-performing teams to the level of the best performing teams, and that would make a big difference to that overall satisfaction.
Thanks, Ben.
Sorry, I'd only add to that that is part of the post bright light work as well, and you know, building in that response to victims. You know, the whole thing of Soteria and now bright light of being victim centered, context led, perpetrator focused. It's the that victim centered bit is central to the way that they change the management of investigations and the follow through, if you like. And that starts with the allocation point, but then the follow through. And I promise you, we are, in all the ways that Ben has talked about and other ways, we are raising that point around victims and reminding the significance of that follow-up contact, exactly as Ben said.
Thank you. And it's a comment really in that it beggars belief that such a core function can't be done to a higher standard as part of what Sarah always talks to us about the leadership and the culture. It's amazing really, isn't it? But anyway.
Agreed. Can I just add one other point? Claire touched on the allocation there and the work they're looking at in what you would know as phase 2 of the operating model. A name they've now given that is Mosaic. And an important part of that is looking at where those cases get allocated, if at all, because the reality is, as you will appreciate, there are some crimes that are just, there are no reasonable lines of inquiry for them to pursue. So it's about making that decision early and appropriately. So if they really feel that they can't get anywhere with that investigation, making sure that doesn't get passed out to frontline officers to end up getting nowhere with it. But it's also about trying to make sure that the right investigations are going to the right teams as well, and trying to balance that volume. And this is particularly acute for our frontline response officers, obviously the largest cohort of officers in the force, and they have those very different roles of, one, having to respond on blues, and twos, running towards emergency and danger, and at the same time they're carrying investigative caseloads. So they're trying to really look into how they can better balance that across the force and different options for how that can work going forward.
Clarity of messages there.
Okay, thank you, Gabby. I've got Heather, Ash, Martin, Peter, and then Andy, and then Lisa.
We love performance, Monica. We love performance. So I'm glad it's at the top. I've got a few questions, if that's all right. Just, I do it in a slightly different order because one builds on what Gary just asked about. When I was first involved here, we always used to look at the victim code of practice. Now, in my head, I think that might have been changing recently, but I think there's something about the victim code of practice that I would like to keep an eye on going forward, because that covers all the crime types, as it were, rather than looking at things which might be for a particular crime type. So just as a kind of a flag, that I think that is something, because it is something we need to keep. You need to keep an eye on. The other ones I've got just from the data, the first couple of pages, 55, 56, looks at homicide and then also reducing serious violence. And it's great that the homicide rates are going down. Brilliant. The next one talks about the reducing serious violence, but the reporting of serious violence going up. And I'm just thinking, where is that upward trend going to end? I mean, you might say in data sense it's low, because there's been some data reporting things. But actually, it's on its way up now, and it's that kind of thing of where will it be when we see it in a quarter, and what alarm bells has it rung for you, and what are you questions you're asking. Do you want the other two as well at the same time, and then you can deal with it. The other one is further. The next one down is drug supply and county lines. So again, if you kind of contrast that bit about the drug trafficking crime and the drugs disruptions, I'm wondering if that data telling me that the drug disruptions are not keeping up with the increase in crime? Are they aligning? well in terms of activities. And my last one was, oh, was there another one? Oh, no, that will do for now, I think. I've got questions about the table with the arrows, the coloured arrows coming up, but I think other people do too. So I'll shut up when I leave you with those two for me. Thank you.
So on the victim code of practice, I'm really glad you raised that. And yes, there is some developments happening around that and updates on the victim code of practice, including there's been a consultation on it. And one of the key things within that for me is the compliance. Who is keeping an eye on compliance. To my mind, police and crime commissioners or our subsequent bodies are the most obvious people. I am happy to report in recent days I have had confirmation that the local policing body, which is the definition of PCCs, our successors and deputy mayors, are still where the MOJ see that sitting. But because it does make sense. It's a systems point, that compliance point. Since we last met, the new Victims Commissioner, Claire Waxman, has stood up an advisory board, and I'm now on that advisory board and was at a meeting 2 weeks ago, the first meeting of that advisory board. And as you can imagine, this was central to that as well. Now, at that point, the MOJ official that was there was being quite nervy about what they were going to do in relation to that compliance point. But like I say, I'm pleased to report that subsequently, and I did raise this through various channels, that we have had that confirmation that whoever was in the room wasn't quite ready to say they were going to make that commitment to the LPB, but they are. So I am pleased about that. And yes, that then, in a sense, gives you a dashboard, if you like, for victims. I mean, it's not that. And please, I probably should have been careful about using that terminology because we're not about to pitch up with a dashboard for that. But it is absolutely valid around the headings, if you like, and the compliance around the code of practice. The reporting of serious violence, and I know Ben and I were talking about this yesterday, so I might actually, I would make a narrative point on that, if you like, which is, yes, I am concerned about this. I am concerned that we are mercifully and have mercifully been seeing reductions in these figures. And there has been a lot of concentrated work around that. You've got information around hotspots and various other things, various in the work that the VRP have been doing and partners have been doing in the violence reduction space. But I can promise you there's no complacency on this. And when just before I was elected, there was obviously a spike of a series of really serious events. And that we absolutely have to do everything we can and continue to keep a really eagle-eyed focus on this, because I hold a nervousness that we're never far from having that kind of horrific experience again, and we've got to keep going at that and keep going at the prevention space and working upstream. It is vital that we keep that focus on the upstream work with our young people, particularly, although obviously not all serious violence happens in the up to 25-year-olds, as you know from the data. But Ben, do you want to pick up on our conversation around drug trafficking, crime and those other bits?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the drug trafficking crime, on the left-hand side, you see the total recorded crime. And we talked here about a year ago around why there was such a big gap between Avon and Somerset and its most similar force group. And when it was looked into by the constabulary, they had identified a number of crime recording issues. So that's why you see in that graph, the Avon and Somerset line has suddenly shot up because they've corrected some of those crime recording issues. I gave an example where a drug incident has has to be recorded as an incident in the first case until they work out what exactly the drugs are. Once they've worked out what the drugs are, they turn that incident into a crime, obviously, because then you can specify the crime relating to the drug. But unfortunately, there were examples where even when they got the testing back, they hadn't gone back into the system to say it was this type of drug and therefore it's this type of crime. It's also just to emphasize again, when it says drug trafficking, I know that necessarily brings a certain picture up in people's minds, but for these definitions, drug trafficking, the best way to think of it is anything other than simple possession. So if there was someone dealing drugs out on the street, that would be possession with intent to supply is the offence that most usually is. That counts as drug trafficking for this basket, so those supply type offences. So that's why you see the blue line shooting up. They've corrected some of those crime recording issues. And then on the table, a number of pages down, when I've provided more detail around the crime outcomes, looking at page 66, because one of the ones that stands out from that is the positive outcome rate for drug trafficking crimes, because that has obviously plummeted. What you will see there is that the number of positive outcomes for drug trafficking has had a slight increase year on year, not a lot, but the rate has plummeted because they are recording. They've corrected those recording errors, so there's a much bigger basket of crime recorded. So even though the outcomes of the number of outcomes has shown slight improvement, the rate has really dropped off a cliff because of those changes that have been made. And you can see that direct correlation between the one line going up and then the rate coming down at the same time.
Because if you don't mind coming back, because it is, this is quite hard to keep a hold in your head. So because when I first looked at it, I was thinking, are we doing enough drugs, the kind of the disruption work? So are you saying that you have assurance, Commissioner, that enough drugs disruption work is going ahead for the volumes of drugs offences of that trafficking sort that you now know are there? Are you comfortable with that matching of activity against the rate of crime?
To pick that up, but
do you want me just to, with a technical point to begin with before Claire will have an overarching comment around this? You're quite right, Heather. Sorry, I should have picked up on like the third side of the triangle, because for a lot of crime, we talk about recorded crime and positive outcomes. You're right, when we're talking about serious and organised crime, we also have disruptions, which is the thing you're picking up on, and that is recorded separately. So there's an overlap. So a positive outcome, if you have, charged someone who's involved in supply of drugs, that's a positive outcome. Plus that would be a disruption of that offence. But there are other disruptions which take place. So for example, it's the best way to describe it is the Al Capone tactic. Sometimes you're going after the serious and organised criminals, not for the main thing they're doing, which is drug dealing. You will find other ways of disrupting them. Traffic offences might be a classic example. So that's just to explain some of that technical difference. I will throw over to Claire for obviously the point you put around her assurance on this.
So, is there more they could do? Yep. Absolutely. But, with the resources they've got, challenging. This was an AFI around serious organised crime, and it's, a continuing area of focus, although that has improved. But I talked to both Avon and Somerset Police about this, but also the Regional Organised Crime Unit and the work that they do around disruption. Indeed, we had something called Operation Scorpion the week before last, where that was looking specifically at areas like the pub trade and what's happening in and around pubs, in terms of that, dealing, trafficking, business, drugs business. But so it is an area of focus. Am I satisfied about anything? That's it's not my job to be satisfied. I think it's my job to be always looking for improvements in these areas, but it is an area of focus.
Okay, thank you. I've got Ash and then Martin.
Thank you. Three quick ones for me. First two probably for you, Claire, and then on to Ben. So thank you for the update on the 4 levels. Do you have an expectation of the level you can share, and are you happy with it? Secondly, in the data, what trend concerns you the most, really, or is driving your kind of work day to day? Because I'm sure there'll be some you're more concerned with than others. And the third point's on the data quality. There seems to be a lot of issues with the data. I know, Ben, you've mentioned that before. What are we doing to address that? And kind of knock on to really Carl, maybe, with a new business plan that's going to have measures on performance, how can you measure something if the data doesn't give you the ability to measure it? And are you concerned about that? It's kind of related.
Thank you, Ash. The answer on the performance framework is, of course, we're dealing with something completely new. And so we have best guesses, in likelihood. I think most forces are going to be in 2 or 3. And I think we're likely to be in 2 or 3. Although in the definition, level 1 is, this is just where forces should be normally. I don't think they're going to put many forces into level 1, is my reading of what we're getting from the Home Office around this. So, like I say, 2 or 3. 4 is, kind of serious concerns. 2 or 3 is different levels of systemic concern or individual areas of concern. And so, but because it's so new, it's actually quite hard to tell how that's going to come out. So yeah, that's my best guess. What drives concerns? There's I think it's the systems bit that is my concern. It's how the resources are working as a whole. So it is around that neighbourhood policing. We're about 6 months into the changes to the Borough Command Unit. We're in the process of looking at how do we rationally address how well that's working, getting a lot of good feedback on the improvements. Obviously talk to the superintendents, and we all talk to teams in different ways. But it goes to the issues raised around victims. It goes to, what are the changes we're looking for in that? So that's those systems points, because you could look, the level of different things that policing responds to. So there's a background concern that actually we haven't talked about yet at all. But it is, Bristol has the second highest level of protests outside of London. That is staffed through overtime. That takes a lot of officer time, as well as resources from other forces. I am deeply concerned, as I know a lot of people are, about what this summer is going to bring for us in terms of that community cohesion, protests, far-right activity, the consequences of that, and then rising levels of tension in the city, particularly Bristol, although we saw in Taunton last weekend, we had demonstrations. And that was a big concern in August 24, was that it would be little fires all over the region, all over the force area, but mercifully that didn't come to pass. But it's that not only in and of itself, but because of that, we're in summer demand, which has a consequence. This month is actually the worst month for summer demand. It's, we're seeing that, but it's the resources going into that are taken away from elsewhere. And so you've got those concerns of underlying service level because you are dealing with that protest level. So I think that would be where the concerns sit. Data quality, we know the force are doing something about this. There is activity. I think, we'll let Ben talk to this, but what I will say is that there is, fundamental work going on in Avon and Somerset Police, because the difficulty with those problems of data quality is not having a baseline. The baseline is uncertain, and therefore trends become more difficult to read. Like as we've just been talking about with the drug trafficking point, you're readjusting your baseline, and that gives you more challenging data consequences. My
concern is if I think it's we share the concern. My question is, how does the force know they're getting on top and doing a good job if the data's not there. I imagine you're putting that to them, but
Yeah.
isn't it?
You have got those contrary indications that, or rather those different indications, not contra, but you've got those different levels that, like positive outcomes or other points that you can point to and go, right, okay, what's this looking like? But, it is a concern. Ben, do you want to pick up on that precisely?
Yeah, two things. So to carry on with the data quality point. So crime recording, I think we were speaking about it last time, very complicated, and unfortunately it can be a bit of a pendulum. So in the past, Avon and Somerset, and this have been found in previous peer inspections, not the most recent one, but before that, have not been recording as to the standard they should have. They put things in place to try and address that. And what they did a couple of months back was commission an independent audit, because they didn't want to wait for HMIC to come in and check every couple of years. Goes to your point, well, how are they trying to understand what's going on? So they commissioned an independent audit of that and actually found a number of areas of crime where they'd now started over-recording effectively. So there are certain rules where you don't have to record certain crime types in certain ways. And it's almost, they tried a belt and braces approach, given their previous failings have not recorded enough, and now the pendulum swung too far the other way. And I think it was in this last meeting where we were talking about rape recording, for example, and how Avon and Somerset had come out as the highest in the country, and that is, has to be largely due to crime recording issues. There's nothing unique about Avon and Somerset that would drive that specific type of offending here. So that's one way Avon and Somerset are trying to check and test what's going on, how they're improving, and they are planning to do another one of those independent audits. It's also worth saying they do have in-house kind of quality assessment that goes on that checks and tests those outcomes on an ongoing basis, but they do very much like to bring in the independents to make sure it's being done properly. And then just going to the other question, not to the too much add to the list of things we're concerned about, but the area I want to bring in a bit of national context is the investigating crime. It goes to what we were already talking about, positive outcomes, but in the current Peel cycle, there have been 8 forces on the cycle that have had their reports published now. Of the different themes that HMIC look at, investigating crime is the one that has come out worst of all of them. There's been like 2 inadequate, and 3 requires improvement out of 8 in total. So my concern is not just driven by some of the data we all look at for Avon and Somerset, it's actually driven by that broader context that clearly policing nationally is not doing what it needs to get those investigative standards up. And part of that is around, things like learning, making sure that officers are, like I was talking about, consistency across teams, making sure the worst performing teams are learning from the best performing teams. But then going to Claire's point around other demand and pulls on the services is working out with the reality of when officers are getting pulled away to respond to, whether it's the 909 incidents every day or whether it's the large scale protests and disorder, that takes away officers who are carrying crimes that need to be investigated, and naturally that will have an impact on the standards because they get pulled away from getting the evidence, contacting the victims, etc. And now that isn't an excuse. It's just an acknowledgement of one of the challenges that policing is facing. And based on what HMIC are saying so far from this current Peel round, it looks like it is a national challenge.
Okay, thank you. Martin, then Peter.
Yes, thank you. Yes, my main question, actually, I will take over to the next item, which is the police plan and the effects of these crime figures on the police plan and what steps are going to be taken, but that's coming later. The other point I was going to raise has been more or less answered in the facts of the crime reporting issues. But you Ben explained them in great depth there about the drugs thing. But I noticed that there was a comment also on the crime reporting issues in relation to reducing neighbourhood crime. Now, it seems to me it's getting a bit of a usual issue on these reports to say, oh, it's down to a crime reporting issue, and I'm sure it is, but it doesn't read well. It reads very badly. And if you're a member of the public or a cynic, would I be, you're going to say, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? And it doesn't. It reads really badly in my mind. All right, one on here on drugs. Yes, okay, I understand that one. But there it goes again on neighbourhood crime. I find that a very worrying trend to have to keep putting in this report. And I suspect it's the Home Office changing things, but it doesn't read well.
I will let Ben respond to that properly, but just sorry. The reason I smiled, Martin, is that we do pick this up with the police. When the data's going in the right direction, it's because of the brilliant work they've done. When it's going in the wrong direction, it's because of crime recording. So that was why I kind of ironically smiled at that point. But Ben, do you want to pick up on the specific?
Yeah, it was just a specific point on the neighbourhood crime. It was around the vehicle offences in particular. There was an issue, and that was slightly different. Unfortunately, I'd love to blame the Home Office counting rules on this one, but it wasn't. It was effectively a process mistake that the constabulary had made, which is what caused that impact. And in this case, it was the old type of mistake where that process changed, and then it meant they weren't properly capturing. Also, they were under recording some of those vehicle offences. So that's what explained that particular issue.
Okay, thank you. We have Peter, then Andy, then Lisa.
Right. Firstly, Claire, a little story and a question. Picking up what you said earlier about the Home Office, how they link forces together. When Anne was in hospital, the lady in the next bed, her son came to visit her. So when food arrived, I invited him down for a coffee. Turns out he works in the Home Office, working with the police unit. And he was going on about his mother had a break-in, and I think that's what caused the stroke. And Gloucestershire police were bloody useless, right? That's what he was saying. So I said what I was involved in. He was unaware Avon and Somerset had a coastline. His mother lives in Gloucester. Right. There you go.
On your story, I rest my case.
But on the business crime plan, I'm glad to see you working on retail crime, because I get involved in this for two reasons. One, I opened the first wine supermarket in Bristol. And then my last 15 years of working life, I worked for Morrison's and ran a petrol station. And I used to get letters from the court saying how much people had been fined when they got things wrong. And lately, on Saturday, for example, 2 people tried to get away with £1,300 worth of stuff from Morrison's. I spotted it, alerted the security guy, and they had a third person doing something to distract him. So I'm glad to say, with 6 supermarkets around me, because they're always moaning at me, but I'm glad to see that part of that is shoplifting. A lot of people say it's low priority, but it's good to see now. And I was talking to our local inspector last night. We've now got 3 people on remand. 2 people have been sent for 3 months in prison, and 2 have been tagged. And that's shoplifting, persistent shoplifters. So it's working.
Good to hear. I don't know if, Kevin, you've been doing a lot of work on this, so do you want to pick some points up on that?
Yeah, on retail crime, obviously, I think it has been a challenge in the beginning to say shoplifting is a real crime. There was a point when it dropped a long way down the pecking order, and we've done a lot of work with Avon and Somerset, particularly to pick that up. And you'll have seen in the annual report, we're working on a business crime strategy, which is aimed at tackling the different types of crime and shoplifting you get in different areas. So high streets are very different to what happens in Cabot Circus in Bristol or the Sovereign Shopping Centre in Weston-super-Mare. So we're trying to bring together different leaders of those different types of crime. And also we've done a lot of work on ensuring that the community crime leads appointed by the bids now get regular monthly interaction with police officers. So we are, I think the thing is true about, we can talk about it in the annual report if there are questions about it, but we have certainly raised the profile of shoplifting and retail crime and business crime in general.
And that's going to continue to develop because we're going to agree with Avon and Somerset this business crime strategy, which will lay out a whole new set of targets and aspirations.
Thank you. And over to Andy and then Lisa.
Thank you, Julie. Quite a lot of the points I was going to raise have been raised by others, you'll be pleased to know. But I'd just like to pursue Martin's points that he raised earlier. If we look at the reduction of serious violence statistics, on first look at it, as others have said, the figures look really bad. And that's something to worry about, which others have said. But the thing that I don't fully understand is I'm a fairly simple-minded individual, and I don't fully understand why it is that it's so difficult to record crime. It seems to me a fairly basic thing. So the statistics are skewed, and it's been mentioned, as Martin said, on a number of occasions, that it's about the recording of the crime. So my question is, why is it so difficult? And can we have a paper that explains to simpletons like me why it is so difficult to record crime? Because there's no point in producing these statistical tables if there's another variable which is compounding the results. It means that these things don't make a lot of sense. And so in order for us to understand precisely why it's so difficult, I think it would be really, really helpful if that could happen. And finally, from me, I would welcome more conviction statistics. In this particular pack, the only the conviction statistics we have is on rape, which does look encouraging. And so thank you for that. But that's really what the general public are interested in. So could we please have more of that in other reports?
Thank you, Andy. And I am going to pass over to Ben in a second. But the only thing I would say on why is it so difficult to record crime, my discoveries over the last 2 years of, on the surface, not on the surface, but, you do look at things and think, and then realize just when you get into them how much more complex they are than you originally think them to be. So, but that's why I have Ben, and that's why I'm going to hand over to him right now.
So, you are right on the face of it, since we're sure it can't be that hard. Someone's been assaulted when we record that someone's been assaulted on the system. So I've just found the guidance for frontline officers and staff on crime recording rules is 98 pages long. So that gives you a kind of insight into how complex this is. And there are rules for, I'll just give you a couple of examples to, as she's saying, to paint that picture. There's something called the finished incident rule. So what that means is if you've got the same victim and offender and the victim reports a series of crimes to the police at a particular time, only one crime is recorded, even though multiple offences have been committed, because it's the same victim and offender. And a way that would play out in practicality is shoplifting. So there are two areas where we see this a lot: shoplifting, domestic abuse. Shoplifting is, as an example, if the shop rings up and says, we've had John Smith in here nicking stuff every day this week, that doesn't get recorded as 7 separate crimes. That gets recorded as one crime because they've informed the police on that occasion that it's happened 7 times. So that's an example of where it gets complicated. And then turning to the domestic abuse example, where it gets even more complex. On top of that is something called the principal crime rule. So if you had a victim of domestic abuse, they contact the police and then they inevitably tell the long history of the abuse they've suffered, because we know it takes a long time usually for a victim to come forward to the police. The police then have to work out which within that group of crimes that the victim is reporting is the most serious crime, record that crime, and then not the others, because that finished incident rule. And then there have been complications over the last couple of years where the Home Office, and this is where sometimes they do make it more difficult, they said a number of years back, actually, where there are conduct crimes, so that's things like stalking and harassment, they said, we want you to record that as an extra crime. And then a few years later, they said, no, we don't want you to record that as an extra crime anymore. So it is very complicated. It should be simple, but 98 pages of guidance for officers and staff, and hopefully those couple of examples I've given you there explain some of the complexity within that.
I'd also add that in my visits out to see frontline officers, there's, we've got a relatively, junior workforce doing a lot of this. And it's the supervisors, both at sergeant and inspector level, that are having to coach, assure, teach. So they don't always necessarily get it right first time. And actually, a lot of that time and effort is by the constabulary is going into assuring and training. So I think some of this, as you heard, 98 pages, you don't necessarily carry that around with you the whole time. So I think there's a little bit of understanding that the front line, we've got a really, relatively young and inexperienced workforce in some places, and they're learning as they're going. I'm not making an excuse for them. I'm saying there's other reasons behind, which is a human factor, not solely understanding of process and policy. Thanks.
Just come back. I mean, that's helpful, but it doesn't solve the problem.
You asked the question, didn't you? I was looking at Gary. Sorry.
The problem we have is trying to understand the data. So I go back to the point. I'm very surprised to hear that it's 98 pages and somewhat depressed as well. And so I would still welcome. There must, as Carla said, there must be a simple version. You can't carry 98 pages around in your head. So I just, for my own benefit, and I think for the benefit of the panel, we just want to understand why the figures do not relate to what you want them to because of the recording of the data. That's the issue, and it's complicated. Okay, you've got to work with a complicated set of rules. Okay, please make them simple for us because I'm sure they're simple for your frontline officers.
Well, the reality is that they're not, and it's worth pointing out there are two ways in which the crime largely gets recorded. So there's the kind of centralised team who would review and record these, but then also, as Carl was saying, officers, if they, I don't know what their word is, then kind of discover or uncover additional crimes, there's something to be considered there. And for me, Andy, the answer to your question is actually about better surveying, because we already know, aside from the process issues around recording crime, a lot of victims don't come forward to the police, especially when we're talking in areas of vulnerability like domestic abuse and sexual assault. And so I think surveying of the public is actually the best way to understand what's going on, hence why there's the Crime Survey of England and Wales, where they do try and get that insight, but unfortunately that's only reliable at a national level. I have raised on calls with the Home Office and with the Office of National Statistics directly this point about expanding that surveying, because for me, the insight that could genuinely provide us is we would really get a better idea of the crime that is happening in our area. Now, interestingly, with the new police performance system, I've heard some talk of they are now looking to expand the Crime Survey for England and Wales to allow us to get a better local insight. Whether that materialises, as Claire was alluding to early on, things change and often at last minute. But for me, that's where we need to get that insight, is really understanding from people what the true level of crime is, not just what the police are recording. Because even with perfect police processes, we've still got loads of victims who don't tell the police in the first place.
Thank you. I've got Gary who wants to quickly come in on that point.
I was just going to say, kind of having lived 30 years in the police, this is every year, every single year for the last 45 years I've been involved with the police, this same conversation's gone round and round. So if you're overly sympathetic to the complexity of it, nothing gets measured. There's no accountability. So at some point, you've got to kind of say, if you measure it like this, this is what we will judge you against. Because if you don't know whether up or down is good or bad, how on earth can you hold an organisation to an account? So if part of the strategy is to improve recording to get a more accurate, that's part of the challenge to say, if you're saying we want a reduction in burglary and you're over recording burglary, well, part of your action plan is to improve the recording of burglary. And it is also to reduce burglary. So you've got to end up being unsympathetic to all these complexities, because else, what else do you do?
Yeah, I completely take that point, and we do, and I think that's where looking at outcomes. Obviously, outcomes is a key measure for us. It's a key measure you are all interested in terms of those crime outcomes, and that's why hopefully it's helpful for you, as you've requested, that we've added in the number of outcomes as well as the percentage, because the number of outcomes hopefully is putting aside then the recording issues, which can artificially suppress or increase an outcome. Actually, if you're looking at the raw numbers, you would hope that the numbers of outcomes are increasing, which they are in a number of areas, but not in all. So I think that's where we need to focus the accountability on the investigative outcomes, because that is easier to measure through outcomes, through things like victim satisfaction, telling what has your experience been. But on the reducing burglary point, when it comes to crime prevention, as you'll be aware from obviously many years working the job, no one has come up with a satisfactory way of measuring has someone actually genuinely reduced crime in their area. Because even with some of the Home Office initiatives that have come in, like the hotspot funding over the last 18 months, there's a question over, has it genuinely reduced crime or has it displaced crime? And it's nationally, this has been a conversation that, there's a national crime prevention strategy. No one has nailed down this is a really precise way we can say for definite that X amount of crime has been reduced or not. So that's not just an Avon and Somerset challenge, that is a national challenge.
Yeah, I'm just very conscious of time. We've got 2 more people to speak. Thank you.
I'm now confused. I was before, but you've mentioned outcomes, and there's a chart here that shows outcomes, and then it goes on to positive outcomes. What is the difference? I thought outcomes was the number of crimes. I've obviously got that wrong. I understand positive outcomes, what we used to call clear-ups, but mustn't mention them. So what's the difference between outcomes and positive outcomes then? You mentioned just now.
Yeah, sorry. No, absolutely. That is probably my loose language there. What I was trying to say is we've expressed positive outcomes both as a percentage, but also as a raw number. So hopefully you would want to see that raw number of positive outcomes increasing. But yes, what you may have called clear up or detection rates, although. Again, I'm just going to say you probably don't need to know the technicalities for the meeting right now, but the Home Office have redefined what they class positive outcomes as. So there's now 3 separate groups. Of fact, there's solved, resolved, and unresolved, and that's a very recent change that's been brought in as part of the new police performance system. So it's just demonstrating, and again, that's the Home Office. We have to use those rules classifications. They've made it slightly more complicated, and we don't necessarily agree with how they've grouped those outcomes either. And I don't think you probably would if you looked at how they grouped some of those outcomes.
Thank you, Ben. If I can hand over to Lisa and then finally John, then we'll draw a line under this one.
Thank you. So there's a couple of places in the measures summaries where the report references local implementation of the national VORG strategy and action plan. I wonder if you could just give us an example of what that looks like in practice in terms of how you're kind of implementing specific actions. So on page 61, and then also another question around victim satisfaction. So while it's good to see that rape charge rates have improved, although it does look like that they've dropped slightly recently, and it's important to note that less than half of rapes actually resulted in a conviction. So there's clearly quite a lot of work to do further up the criminal justice system. That sits alongside victim satisfaction remaining low. And on page 60, it notes, I think it was page 60, that there's no existing domestic abuse victim satisfaction survey currently in place in Avon and Somerset. I'm assuming this is the same for victims of sexual violence. So I'm wondering, given that a large number of the kind of reported crimes in Avon and Somerset are domestic abuse related, is there a plan to bring in some kind of specific victim satisfaction measure, on domestic abuse and sexual violence? Because it feels like there's a gap there in terms of what we're measuring.
Yeah, you're right. There is a gap. And yeah, would be this again, sort of, we measuring outcomes of the changes that come about as a result of bright light, which, as I say, as Ben talked to, that kind of phase 2 of the force reorganisation. We won't get those changes in place, fully until this time next year because of the level of organisational change involved. So, can you talk to me to the first point again? Sorry, Lisa.
That's okay. You mentioned in a couple of places in the measures summary. So I noticed it on the rape, better criminal justice outcomes for rape cases. And in a planned action, number 4 is local implementation of the National Violence Against Women and Girls Strategy and Action Plan. So I just wondered what that looks like in practice. Can you give us an example of something that's happening locally that aligns with that?
Yeah, so this is, there's a lot going in and on around that. As you know, the strategy came out in December. The national government strategy came out in December. It covers a lot of work. I'll take one prime example, which is perpetrator programs. And so, the DRIVE program is the predominant perpetrator program that we use in Avon and Somerset. That there has been national funding that we are using locally around that program of work. We are right now in discussions with the Home Office, and again, in both that combination of my local and national role, they have just opened up a tender process, a procurement process that we are working with them around the details of, with the new safeguarding minister around, because of the challenge we have around the timeline that they've got for this and the implementation and the extension of the current DRIVE program. But it is that perpetrator program is one example of some of the work that we are doing locally with that national strategy, but also pushing through the kind of to make it more effective, we would argue, than the way the Home Office have framed it currently. So I can talk a lot more about, and will do probably in the report conversation, but we are definitely working on that.
Can I just quickly make a point on the survey, and you'll notice that there's a line or two in the annual report about this. So the victim satisfaction survey that you've seen presented in data for a long time is a survey that's been running for quite a number of years, a telephone survey of non-vulnerable victims. So the point you're making is absolutely right around vulnerable victims, whether that is domestic abuse, sexual offences, etc. The Constabulary have introduced a new victim voice survey, which is like an anonymous online survey. They have launched it in the first instance again with non-vulnerable victims because they wanted to kind of try and test it first before, obviously, with the lower risk victims. Unfortunately, that hasn't had the take up they were hoping for yet, so they need to work out how they can ensure that victims engage with that, certainly with the lower risk crimes to begin with, before they move on to then wanting to contact vulnerable victims with this kind of surveying, and also being very aware. And I was part of the design with the Constabulary, so they are very aware of the discussions around traumatisation and re-traumatisation, and when you're asking people about their experiences, so it's trying to judge how they can do that in a sensitive way, but also might provide them some feedback on their service. So they are trying to, but by no means have cracked that nut yet to work out the right way to do it.
I just add to that exactly the point that Ben made in terms of the vulnerability of victims and how you do that with care. But then also, of course, when you are talking to victims, it's not always just about their police experience. And the experience of victims in, with the whole criminal justice experience, there are also, with my local criminal justice board head on, there are also real problems with the rest of the system and how that responds to and takes care of victims.
Thank you. And a final question from John.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, looking at page 57, the drug supply and county lines, from March 25 onwards, there was quite a rising trend in trafficking crime. And next to that, the level of drug disruptions between roughly March 22 and March 24, there was a huge increase in the amount of drug disruptions, which was great to see. And then the amount of drug disruptions fell off a cliff. Can you explain, I know that was probably before you were appointed, but can you or your colleagues explain that drop in the amount of disruptions? And as a corollary of that, are you satisfied the force is doing enough to act against drug crime? And related to that, actions to drive performance in this area, mentions made amongst others of targeting operations focusing on taxis. Are you liaising effectively with local taxi licensing authorities on that issue? Thank you.
So I am going to lean on Ben again on this one, but that peak is very noticeable. I think we talked earlier as well to that point around the changes in the drug trafficking recording, and again, Ben can pick that up. This is when it comes to things like taxis and, as you say, that working with local authority partners, this is one of the areas where we have seen a positive change, which is since the implementation of the geographic scheme from the 3rd of November, geographic model rather, that has actually, we've seen improvements in that partnership working, and that's come through from our partners in the local authorities. Always more work to do. I can't speak explicitly on if that has transformed in the working with taxes, but I will say that is what what is happening in other spheres. I don't know, Ben, if you have any specific points or awareness on that.
We can certainly, hopefully, fill in a gap on the point you made around and the peak, like you said before, Claire.
Items to cover, and that's only an hour and 10 minutes to do so. So without further ado, I go into item 12, the PCC's annual report, and hand over to the Commissioner to introduce our report.
Thank you very much. And so delighted to introduce the annual report. And as you see, self-evidently, it is laid out in terms of the priorities. So obviously the draft report, looking forward to comments from the panel around it. So we will take those into account in producing the final report. So on priority 1, in terms of the neighbourhood policing, we have talked to some of this already, but the Hotspot Action Fund, which delivered over 16,000 hours of high visibility patrols. We had the increased number of officers and the translation of how that worked in Avon and Somerset to the movement of experienced officers into neighbourhood tasking teams and having those 8 teams around the area, with that focus on ASB, with the focus on retail crime and persistent problems that the chief inspectors can highlight into the neighbourhood tasking teams. And towards the end of my year, this year that this is referring to as well, the force-wide antisocial behaviour action plan and the work that we obviously talked to in the last meeting on that. Last board meeting, yeah. When it comes to priority 2 strands of work under that, the now violence against women and girls. Again, we have mentioned Bright Light and the work that has gone on around domestic abuse. We had the academic findings. We're now in the process of that getting translated into operational change. There is the National VOG strategy, and the fact that I sit on the advisory board for that, and again, through that, able to work with the leading ministers as was Jess Phillips and Alex Davis-Jones, now with Natalie Cleese and Catherine Atkinson in both the Home Office and the MOJ, and that kind of joining up of the national to what's going on locally is Lisa pulled out in the question as well. Who knew when I went into life in politics that I would be running a campaign on non-fatal strangulation? But this indeed is a necessity, and this is something that we see from that online to offline in real world experience. This is just one example of how this is manifesting, but it is a necessary campaign, and it's had a lot of reach as a consequence of, for example, the seminars at the beginning, and 600 professionals signed up to see the seminars on non-fatal strangulation, which shows the level of demand there was for that. So again, and the continuation of the DRIVE programs I talked to as well. On the serious youth violence, the Violence Reduction Partnership reached 28,000 children and young people with differing levels of interventions, and also securing that hyperlocal knife crime funding of approaching £250,000 for targeted prevention in hotspots. With the priority 3, we've got police and crime grant funding that's enabled prevention, range of prevention activity with early intervention for young people, targeted problem solving in hotspots again, and there are a lot of different elements of that funding working with our local authority partners. With victims, talked to that too, but the newly commissioned Victim Service Partnership is embedding, and it's working well to date. And that's specialist provision, for example, the Sexual Violence Alliance of victim support. And then on the standards in policing, we have the continuing work in volunteer panels and the scrutiny panels, which are really useful, particularly the police powers and the police complaints panels and that independent scrutiny, custody visiting as well. And then the performance data we've been talking to a large extent too. What I would also highlight in the annual report is those bits at the end which we pulled out separately with the retail crime, with the road safety crime and the rural crime, because those are issues that come up in my public facing meetings all over the place, and they therefore are getting specific focus, and each of them have a forum in different ways, and that is really important too, that they get that specific focus as well. So delighted to take questions, comments, points on the annual report. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. Unsurprisingly, my question is around male violence against women and girls. It's good to see the programme that's happening in response to misogyny and harassment in relation to the World Cup. Still somewhat undermined by the number of players in the World Cup who have existing reports of abuse made against them, but that's not an issue here. It's really good to see this, I think, in response to the World Cup, but obviously harassment and abuse and misogyny is an issue all year round in sport. So it would be great to see a continuation of this kind of work, particularly around challenging of attitudes and encouraging things like bystander intervention, and partnering with football clubs in the same ways that show racism, the red card projects and works. It'd be great to see that work continue, I suppose, outside of the World Cup as well.
Thank you, Lisa, and I completely agree. And actually, in the last year, we had the Women's Rugby World Cup in Bristol, and there was a lot of work done around that, and using that event. Obviously, it wasn't a lot of women, we're going to those events rather than anything else, but there's a real commitment in the kind of event policing, if you like, the people that do that, I was getting my P's, is it PP? Yeah, anyway, there's a lot of P's involved in the policing bit in that. It's not that, yes, it's public protection, but it's not the vulnerability piece of it. But anyway, there are commitments, and then you met before my previous staff officer, Jo Haywood-Mead, and other officers, that she works closely around these sporting events, precisely for that one, in terms of, policing that misogyny at those sporting events. There's a level of expertise that isn't, just around the World Cup, but around, for example, the clubs in Bristol, the football clubs in Bristol particularly, and work goes on match days, precisely to that point. But yeah, it's more to do again, but yeah, it is actually something that is a very conscious piece of work. The Balearic work that's being done in the Football World Cup this year, as we speak, is around the England games, and it's standing up that individual provision. It's not something we can do, that we can afford at each event, each sporting event, but it's very targeted for this World Cup that we're going through at the moment.
Thank you. And Heather? Thank you, Chair. A few small things, if I may. One is a kind of a sort of rhetorical question, really, which is about, there's a lot of issues about consistency in the report, which is great, consistency of practice and service and so on. But I'm just wondering whether you had thought about having a statement at the beginning of the report that talked about having consistency of service and satisfaction across the geography of your force area. I'm not sure that might be hostage to fortune, but I think that is something that we ask you about a lot in here, and I'm just wondering whether that might be some of your kind of positioning statement going forward, because I think it's important to know wherever you live, you should expect a standard of policing. On more specific things, so a couple of things just in the report. I know one's on page 88, and I can't remember the other page number, but there's something about, for me, I'd like to know how many practices you've seen change in the police force as a result of being properly trauma-informed. And then there's a real criticism we've had in other parts of the partnership where you understand what trauma is, you become trauma-aware, but you can't point to anything that's changed in the way you either do a service, when you look after a person, whether it's really trauma-informed or not, whether it's embedded. And the second one is a similar thing, again, around the out-of-court disposals, particularly the child-focused elements. Again, are there improvements really that have been driven by a child focus that you could point to or that you reassure about?
Good questions, very good questions. And in terms of the trauma-informed, there is always more that can be done. And I think there are different levels of experience of it, and this is built into the training, it's built into the PCDA, it's built into other areas of the way that the police are taught to do their job. So it's that training practice, if you like. I think it's being built into the mosaic. It's, Ben rightly said, this is this operational change is being done. So that is an area where it's being sort of designed into the system over this coming year. It's then about the specialist functions. And so you look at Soteria areas, those Bluestone, as it's called, the unit in Somerset, police responding to Brasso. But one of the things is still, do the guys that turn up, or guys and girls that turn from and women that turn up to those emergency incidents,
Are they sufficiently trauma-informed at the moment? Yeah, those points are points of potential failure because they're rushing out to deal with the situation that's in front of them, and are they sufficiently trauma aware? I think there is. I know I can say this regularly, but there is more to do. There really is more to do on that. But there are points where this is being designed into the system, and I think that's really, really important. I'd also talk to the VCU changes and the geographic model changes, because this is also about having that better line supervision and that better line of sight to these points, and therefore, it's about leadership and culture in the VCUs. That matters as well. When it comes to out-of-court disposals and the being child first, there's two things I would say about that. One is actually just the implement, bringing them in, like, for example, the chance to change, that being absolutely about that. There's more work to do on getting that right and how that's used right, and actually working with partners to challenge around that. But that is there. The other thing is the local criminal justice board that I also chair and works with partner agencies. They have a child first stream of work. We're talking about, we just had a board a couple of weeks ago about should we be mainstream that across everything or still have a distinct pillar of work as well. And but that has been delivering some real change as well. And I know you're going to ask me to give examples, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but I can come back to you on that one, Heather. But it is a real clear line of sight, clear place of things. I may thank you. They're tough questions and deliberately so. And I think the thing about consistency across the entire force, for instance, it is a bit of a trick question because nobody wants to be treated the same as everybody else, but you want the same consistency of service. And that's going to be a real challenge for everybody. But again, it's tricky. And I think that thing about signalling that you might want to be at least asking about, that's important. And then the other was on the bits about child first and trauma informed. It would be quite good to be hearing perhaps in the next meetings about how you're getting that assurance that the messages are going in, but how do you know those points of supervision, those points of kind of checking are actually being done. Ben.
Can I just add a couple of broad things? One example of it, I think we get to point to is violence reduction partnership, because that actually combines the trauma-informed and child-first approach, because the core to how they operate is recognising the risk, and it isn't pigeonholing children, young people, either into your victim or offender. It's actually recognising that spectrum of risk people can be both, and then the data that presents themselves and other people. So they kind of pull together those two strands and how they operate. And then another area where this would be relevant is the Families First programme. This is a national thing that the government's bringing in. Obviously, it's down for all forces, local authorities, you'll be able to implement locally. There's Avon, Somerset have run a couple of pilots on how that will look locally with the statutory deadline taking place next year. And the essence of that Families First approach is about trying to, again, it's that combination of trauma-informed and child first. And I know not too often local authorities will be familiar with it, but actually, if that's done well, that really should bring together the strength and that really improve in that space.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Steps?
Just wanted to pick up on the out of court resolution and scrutiny panel. Looking at the reports from not on this pack but on the website, there's quite a huge disparity in terms of the referrals. Can you elaborate on what sort of action has been taken to address that?
That's a really good question. I could give you an off the top of the head answer, but I'd want to look at that and specifically what the disparities are. I don't have it on the top of my head. Sorry, so
okay.
If you
elaborate. So the change program, chance to change program, is a deferral for those between 18 to 24. mainly from diverse backgrounds, as part of restorative justice, which
that's the intention.
and the part of no comment is obviously where this program starts. I did restorative justice for 4 years. I've worked in prisons and so forth. So I'm not surprised with what I'm finding. I think it's quite clear of the disproportionality here that only 5% of young black men are actually being referred to the program.
Exactly.
And some are, 50% are not referred to the program and are sent directly to court, as opposed to people actually utilizing the app that is meant to be there for the decision making. Now, that doesn't sound like it's an app that's an issue. It doesn't sound like that's the commission that's an issue. It sounds like a human interaction issue. So my question then is, what are you doing to ensure that this program actually works by dealing with the people that are there to make the decision? Because then it's not serving the purpose that it's meant to serve.
Exactly right. So apologies for not recognising that was it's that particular programme that we were talking to, because it is exactly to your point. The chance for change was meant to pick up and respond to disproportionality in criminal justice processes, and to give that chance to chance to change. Without having to make a plea first. So it responds specifically to somebody saying no comment, but there's an opportunity to actually not result in any kind of criminal outcome. Now, it's fair to say that this is not just a concern for me and for the panel, it is also a concern for Avon and Somerset Police, that actually in the outcome, the way it is actually being used, it's being disproportionately used by, applied to white people in that age group. There is a disproportionality, but it's not the way around that we were wanting to recognise. So that, as I say, that is an area of focused work. I know you say it's not about the app, but actually there is an issue with the way that the force generates all these apps. They then don't get used, and because the point of an app is it prompts activity. And so actually there is a problem with the app not being used, because it should prompt more activity in this space. So yes, there is an issue with the app. I talked about the partner agencies as well, because there is also an issue around points at which this would be used. So not just for policing, but policing is obviously key to this. So I will, perhaps cold comfort I can give you, and Kevin's going to come in on this as well, but the cold comfort I can give you is that this is absolutely in sight, and there is a lot more work to do on this to make sure this delivers in the way that it was anticipated. But Kevin, do you want to pick up?
Yeah, I mean, you've been banging the drum on this, and Ben and I actually met a couple of times with the chief superintendent who was leading the programme. He got moved on his job afterwards. And we talked about that. Not that they get moved, don't they? So he got moved, and you had to talk to someone else. And sorry again, is the point I was making. Not that he was this. And we gave them a chance to change. We said, go and prove to us that you can make the numbers work. And they didn't. But I'm going to pick this back up with the what they call the BCU commander, because it predominantly is a problem in Bristol and in East and Central Bristol in particular. And so I'm going to pick it back up with him. But also, this is part of the wider problem, isn't it? And why we're not shifting the dials. And this bigger question of building an anti-racist police force is a much bigger problem. This is an indicator of it. And that needs to be said, I think, which is we have to recognise this bigger problem. That's it. We're going to take time to tackle.
And there's also the disparity between the program in Bristol versus one in Devon.
Yeah.
The one in Devon supports under 18s, the one in Bristol does not. So it's perpetuating the exclusions that some of those young people may face, because it doesn't accept them into this program, whilst some of the program it definitely does. So I think this program is actually highlighting some of the disparities that exist within just the workforce. And if not addressed, then it's not the commission in itself is not meeting its objective, but it's not the commission of what you've commissioned. It's a system. Well, I can't even say it's a system. It's a human thing.
I mean, absolutely right. Policing is ultimately about people and how people operate. There's people interactions, but this is one that chance for change, exactly as Kevin said, is a symptom. It is not it is not the whole picture, and we know there's disproportionality in policing across the piece, which is why there is a whole focus on anti-racism, and Kevin is also working closely on this as well, because it's something that is we recognise there is potentially a commissioned piece of work going on to do that, like we did with Right Light. Kind of that looking into the system, we'll see how that goes and where it goes to. But it's an ongoing. That whole piece is an area of focus.
Can I just add quickly at the points of that? So I'm going to talk about outcomes again, but there's a specific reason. There are 2 new outcomes that were introduced in April this year, and they are for deferred prosecutions, and they're both one for adults, one for children as well. And the reason I mention that here is that the saying goes, what gets measured gets done. And so now there are specific outcomes where the police can say if they've used a deferred prosecution route. So certainly I would hope that in the fact that we've now got visibility of how that's used, and I said there are separate outcomes for adults and children as well, that will allow us to get better insight into where they aren't using that, those deferred routes. Initially, you'll probably be aware of them nationally, it's focused on life crime and related to life possession, but that will give us another route that we can look at and ask those questions of policing about as well.
You've got a final question from Martin and then myself, and then we'll move on.
Yes, actually, it's a bit of a follow-up from Heather's question on trauma. It got me thinking when you were talking about trauma, and I expect other police officers, ex-police officers, do exactly the same in this room, because obviously you go to deal with traumas of other people, and you also deal with trauma yourself. And the way that I personally think it is best dealt with is by proper training, because what you do, I don't know whether you will agree on this, but what you do is you go to an incident and you immediately go into your training mode. And there's no other way of dealing with it, because other than that, you would just go to pieces, I suspect. And so the important thing surely is that the training is correct, proper, and full in its early stages, because that's where you learn it. And I'm not convinced that that is the way that police training now is done, and that may be why when officers go to incidents that they don't kick in to their proper training and don't get back to great results.
I think there's a lot in what you said, Martin. I think that there's being trauma informed about the understanding where the victim is in front of you, and that why they may not be giving perfect evidence because of the mindset they're in. But actually, the thing I wanted to pick on specifically with what you said, Martin, is actually the level of trauma that officers carry as well. It's really, really important. Yep. And that applies across service, but there are specific areas where there is a lot of trauma that's carried by officers. So, for example, the roads policing unit, because of the type of incidents that they repeatedly go through, has been really difficult. Multiple incidents that they've had to deal with this year. So I'm acutely conscious of the trauma that they're carrying. Also, for example, areas like Somerset, where they're dealing with those serious violence incidents, and what they have to look at are internet child abuse teams
and the sort of things that they view as well. So, yeah, this isn't just about how policing responds to victims who hold trauma. It's about what sits with officers as well, and the support that is available to officers too, because I'm very, very concerned about that.
And the training.
The training matters, absolutely. The training matters in two ways. And the way that you're talking to, that people are able to do their job when they get there, and they do it well, and they do it with confidence that they're doing it well. But it is also that training about recognising trauma in the people that they see, and therefore getting the best available evidence as well as anything else, and actually ensuring the victim has a good service from policing as well. I completely agree on that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I just add a quick point to that? It's included in the annual report, but I thought worth highlighting is you bring up the point by around the trauma that officers understand experience. Is that, again, we've got a good pedigree of staff officers in the PCC's office. You may remember Inspector Stuart King. He has led some work in England, Somerset, and he's one of the first forces to do this in England and Wales, where they put together an app which links the officers' column number to the kind of incidents and crimes they've been linked to. So it's called a trauma tracker, effectively. And so it's providing that information to their line managers to be able to show them what that individual has dealt with. So it just allows that, as a key part of that, being trauma informed and supporting the officers first line is their line manager. They really need to be working with them and understanding that. And this app allows them to see that in much more detail. It recognises, obviously, people respond to trauma in very different ways, but it just gives that kind of check and test that they would be able to go on and see, this officer that's under my supervision has attended this many, sort of particularly traumatic incidents. Oh, and it was within a very short space of time. It's just helping them do that check-in that they do with those officers. And you may have seen the article, it was in The Guardian last month, highlighting the work on that. So just thought I'd bring that to your attention, because again, it's another innovative bit of work about trying to support officers.
Good.
I'm a little bit conscious of time, but I will quickly ask this. It's just a plea for a little bit more information on page 86, priority 5, where it talks about striving to make Avon Somerset an anti-racist organisation. I'm just very conscious that it talks about meetings and process stuff within the page, but can we mention a few outcomes as well? Because I'm conscious that the Tackling Disproportionality report was commissioned by your predecessor's predecessor in 2019, published in 2022, and you had the Chief Constable's declaration in 2023, and there seems to be a lot of stuff and activity, as we heard in March's meeting last year reported, and I think there's a lot of interest around the table around the outcomes of some of that work over the passage of time. I think it'd be really great to include it in the report.
Thank you, Julie. And then interestingly, with the Tackling Disproportionality report that there's Brown wrote, that was looking at all of the criminal justice system. So it wasn't just looking at Avon and Somerset Police, although I think off the top of my head it was 44 recommendations on about 70 that were policing related. Interestingly, this was, or relevantly, I brought this back to the Local Criminal Justice Board last month, well, earlier this month actually, I keep thinking in July, because they kind of, right, okay, let's take stock of how have we done, and I've written out to all the criminal justice partners as well, obviously with Avon and Somerset Police, around what have, of these recommendations, how have things changed? And it's safe to say that that more has been done in some of the agencies than in others. And I would say that, to your point precisely, a lot of activity has happened in Avon and Somerset Police. But again, to your point, we are not satisfied that this has shifted the dial. So it then has been, and this was the conversation, the subject of the agenda in the LCJB is, right, we need to switch the focus around from activity to outcome. And that is true across the board, and it's true in Avon and Somerset Police. Because, for example, in the workforce representation, we have not seen, well, truth be told,
the best that can be said is we're standing still. In fact, there are concerns around, even holding to that. So it's looking better in the rising ranks, but actually in the pipeline, deep concerns. So this is why we've got to shift that focus back around to what's shifting, what's changing, why isn't it shifting and changing? And again, I know a lot of people push on this, but the mosaic work, it is being built into that by design. There's more work that kind of is being looked at, external support that can come in to look at the outcome changes and how that can change. And then ongoing decision making. It's important that this is part of the ongoing decision making. This isn't something that is regarded as single standalone project, but this is work that is considered all through the piece. So, for example, where particular departments are located, and again, pipeline working, is that accessible? Is that are we making the most of opportunities? It's something that is constantly in sight, but from that outcomes perspective, as opposed to it's an activity.
Okay, thank you. And it's just mentioned on page 110 about the Independent Scrutiny Board's first annual report being published. I think that's relatively soon, so it'd be really great to have sight of that once that's available. Thank you very much. So in terms of your annual report, I understand it's in draft format, and we provide a report following today's session, so thank you very much. So moving on to...
So can I just add, it's actually something I should have highlighted anyway, but your last question alludes to it. The report is presented slightly differently this year, as in we felt it might be a better read if we took the data and outcomes, because you asked about outcomes in that tackling disproportionality, anti-racism especially. But as a whole piece, we decided not to weave all of the data throughout the report. We'd have the narrative, and as you can see at the end of the report, we've put in a lot of those data and KPIs. So on page 95, you will see key outcomes related to that kind of anti-racism work. So we've included data on disproportionality of stop and search, use of force, and the workforce representation that Claire was saying. So it's just important to know, as members that have read it, if they go back to this report, it's often that if they are looking for those KPIs, those numerical outcomes, to look at that data table at the end of the report. It won't necessarily be in the body of the text.
I get that. I think just the way it read, it sounded like there was meetings and workshops, but I think maybe an example there that actually one of the things to come out of it is the deferred prosecution process, and I think that would be quite interesting. Otherwise, it just reads that there's lots of meetings, but maybe not so much coming out of it. But yeah, so I understand that we prepare a report for yourselves, and moving on to number 13, so the PCC's update report. I think we can have an expectation around the room that we've done our homework and read it. So you can introduce make exceptions, so we have opportunity for questions. That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. So very quickly running through, I have mentioned already the concerns about community cohesion and policing. So particularly post Belfast and the warmer weather, which sounding more, but we are anticipating will come back again. That we know brings a higher likelihood of protest. That obviously points to as well working with local authority partners. Police and crime plan, Carl is doing the work on the business plan, and I think I'll let Carl speak to that too. I'm sure talk about what you're doing as well, but it is important. I would also mention, for example, the continuing with the work on the non-fatal strangulation. There is another area of work that isn't so highlighted, but it is becoming a real issue, which is, as with NFS, things that you wind up talking about that you don't anticipate, which is organised drug facilitated sexual abuse, so the FSA. That is the Giselle Pellico type of offences, and I don't know if I'm alone in this room, but watching her bravery, thinking about it and thinking, dear God, what an awful thing to have happened, not understanding
that was going on under our noses before her case was exposed, and is an ongoing issue. And we have to recognise that the online world is facilitating this as well. But predating that, her case, we had cases in Somerset and around the country. It's an ongoing concern. So to let you know that is also an area of focus. And inevitably, police reform. There's business as usual and then police reform. Some of that is about the partner working on what happens in 2 years' time for all of us. But then also the forced mergers as a potential. But now in context of what's happening at government level, there was a story last week that the forced mergers may or may not be happening. But actually, we are already driving work at a high cost level in the Southwest. So looking at how we had a meeting last week, looking at, for example, digital data and technology solutions that we can look at systemically, that we could work collaboratively at a high cost level. We're doing a 3-2-1 on kind of customers facing integrated technology at the moment. I could talk a lot more about all sorts of things, but the final thing I would say, just as a point, is that the independent custody visitors scheme got a gold award. So for the work that they do and the proactive way they work, so very proud of them. They are really, really valuable.
Thank you for your update and congratulations to them. We must be very proud. And I'll start off with Nicola. Thank you. I think there's loads of really meaty balanced stuff in there, Claire. Thank you. However, I wish I didn't have to keep asking these questions around rural or crime in rural areas. So on page 104, going into page 105, you mentioned that you've done more than 30 engagement events, but I just wanted to flag again that these are mostly urban-based engagement events. You mentioned that you did an LCN in Bridgewater, but I understand this was via Teams, not in person. Is that correct?
It became via Teams, sure. And I think that was at their instigation.
Okay, so on the 7th of May, you were due to be at the South East Rural LCN, that was cancelled by your office the day before. On the 26th of March, you were due to be at the Leamington Moors LCN, that was cancelled by your team on the day.
I did it last week.
That's great, but it was cancelled on the day by your team. On the 31st of March, you were due to be at the Downsborough LCN, that was cancelled on the day by your team.
Right.
So that's over 50 parishes that take officer time to organise those LCNs. That's 50 parishes that are invited to those LCNs. 50 parishes that organise their time around those LCNs to come and see you speak at those LCNs, that we then have to get in touch with to say that you're not coming, which makes us look ridiculous, quite frankly.
I completely take that with it. I will say that at a period around that time, I had some family issues to deal with, and
we reorganised the South East one. The date was at your request.
Right. Yeah.
Whilst I understand that, the timing of the cancellation the day before is the issue.
Yeah.
The family thing I completely understand, and obviously that can't be helped, and I'm really sorry to hear that. But we have massive rural communities that all speak to each other. That's a public confidence issue.
And I'm glad to say that I did the Levels and Moors one actually became online because of the heat last week, but I did that Thursday evening. I did I was there in person. I would have been there in person. I did on Tuesday evening last week was the just gone from there. The High Bridge and on Tuesday evening last week. On Thursday, I'm going to be doing Glastonbury in person. So I promise you, these do matter to me, and I am very sorry about this cancellation, but they do.
Do you understand the perception that the ones that you cancelled are all the super rural ones? The ones that you're going to are the semi-urban ones? That's the issue.
Well, the level more I did do last week.
But what I'd be really interested to hear is, out of these 30+ engagement events, what is the percentage spread that you have done there in rural communities, and I mean proper rural communities? That's the big question.
Understood. And I will actually make a point that, I think there has been a disproportionate number of people in urban areas, and I have raised that with the team, because I do want to do more that is across the whole piece, precisely because I do recognise your point, and I am sorry for those events that got cancelled. I do understand the point around reputation, so thank you for raising it as well.
Thank you. We got Gary and then Helen.
I was just keen, we were talking about it this morning, about an update on the communication strategy to do with public confidence.
So that is coming to the meeting in September. So that is agended for September, because it is a really, really important work. Kevin's been working with specifically the Director of Comms and Engagement in Avon and Somerset Police, with his expertise and experience as well, because that also goes to the point that Nick and others have raised around that communication, how the police communicate, so that trust and confidence piece.
We debated it at some depth this morning and just felt as a panel that if it doesn't emerge at the September meeting, then we should as a panel highlight it in a more public way, because it's been a couple of years now and many promises, many timescales. So it's just really alerting you to the fact that there is an expectation for it to be there in September.
Well, it's not just your expectation, it's mine as well. The Director of Comms in Avon and Somerset believes it's already in his diary that this will be coming to that meeting. Sorry, Kevin.
I was only going to say the same thing. I mean the Director of Comms quite regularly. I've made it absolutely clear what the correct on the next meeting done. I wouldn't say he's everyone was looking forward to it, but he's bringing his engagement strategy. The Deputy Chief comes from myself, sat down with him to work on improving it. So there are a lot. It has moved on. So I'm hoping that that'd be a good opportunity for him to gauge about what you want, which is an and how you want to do it. Because I've said to him, I think it's finished up by, and we want you to have input into it, rather than him just tell you what they're doing. And as an aside, we're also now reviewing our own ACC comms and engagement strategy, particularly around media and social media, to try to be more high profile about telling people what's going on.
The only thing I would say, and I for one would be extremely disappointed if it turned out to be like a consultation event, or I'm thinking about these things being in it, or this should be a defined strategy and a final document, even if it's in draft, for some comments.
Yeah, sorry, Gary, I don't mean to give you the question. It's a finished document. It's ready to be presented. All I'm saying is, I think you should always listen to feedback. If there is an opportunity to improve it, each day away. It's a formal presentation of what exists now.
Kevin, is the attending the meeting in September?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And final two questions from Heather and Elizabeth. Thank you. Thank you. A couple of things from me. One is, and we touched earlier on, obviously the business plan, implementation plan. We're quite good to get a kind of a high level view of where that is and when we're likely to kind of see that one, which is good. Are you expecting that one, Carl? The other one is on page 112. Is the thank you to have the report about the AFIs and areas for improvement from the previous inspections. It's great that it's a short list, a very short list of what's outstanding, but two things kind of sprang out to me. One is that number 4, which is the one about contamination carry out timely investigations into all reported crimes, and make sure that all officers take investigative opportunities, which seems kind of basic, quite important. It's due for a target completion in September, but this obviously been hanging around for a long time. So your comfort level about that, about what you've seen on its way to being, that's going to be closed by 26 September. And the one underneath number 6, which is enclosure process, which is about the constabulary, making sure that it consistently achieves appropriate outcomes for victims, given what we've talked about the victims' satisfaction rating, VCOP, victims getting ragged. And then you call the hostages sausages there, sorry about that. As I have in a moment. But again, that's an enclosure process. Do you really feel it should be an enclosure process? Is it at that point yet? Or does that feel a bit urgent for you, a bit soon?
You want to go first? Okay, fine. Okay. If I just take you back to the Commissioner Annual Report, certainly within the office and Claire, that gave us a real good opportunity to take stock and understand not only what had been delivered, but what had been achieved. Principally over the last 12 months, that's the period of the report up to the end of March, but also possibly a little bit longer because some of that stuff was in track before. Why do I mention this, taking stock? And there's two things I'll pick up here. One is then the focus going forward, recognising the timelines. We've taken the opportunity with Kevin to review the priorities in the Police and Crime Plan for 2024 in light of where we're at in each case. And that will refocus our efforts, and that's been currently written into the business plan. So it takes us a chance to look at the staff capacity, look at how it's tasked, look at how we're using the funds available to us where we have flexibility where it's not specific funding in a particular area. And I make sure that for the next 12 months or thereabouts that we are focused on those priorities, but also that we've escalated a number of them, and I think we've talked about several of them today. So the retail crime concerns, road safety specifically, and back to rural crime as opposed to just crime in rural areas. So those three areas have been escalated, if you like, in terms of our focus. Are we rewriting the Police and Crime Plan? No. But what we are doing is building into the business plan that sort of assessment of where we're at currently, what's been achieved previously. That helps us, I believe, in terms of both the staff priority, staff tasking, and focus with partners. The sort of, if you like, what I might call the final third on as we move forward. And that will help us also in terms of then being really focused on the core business, whilst at the same time as some members of the team are going to have to look at how we transition next year. So that very much sets up our goal. So the business plan, then we reviewed the priorities. There's time now and then looking at the subordinate objectives that deliver those priorities and how and where we've got either actions, measures, or initiatives in play, principally with partners, particularly with ASP. And my goal is that by the end of July, we basically internally, if necessary, reprioritise, redirect the team, or indeed confirmed the activity that's already ongoing. That's where we're at with the business plan. I'm just going to pick up on the data points that I mentioned. When I first came in, I hoped making data-informed decisions, or data directed. As you would have already identified, our data is mixed. Sometimes it's not really clear. Sometimes it's snapshots rather than trends. And most of it comes from constabulary, which doesn't hurt, they've got those. But our capacity to understand it and to actually answer the questions in terms of cause and effect, it doesn't necessarily lend itself to. So I'm certain of the mind now that what we're doing in terms of the business plan, whilst it is data informed, it is not solely based on data. It's got to be based on a combination of evidence that we can see, both from our own assessment, but also from what we get from people like yourselves as well as other partners. And it's therefore got to be done, if you like, in terms of judgment, both in terms of what was in the art of the possible, as well as what the real needs are and the priorities for our communities. So that will drive, if you like, our decision making. So I really sort of invested in our business processes, and the business plan we will review our progress against it on a monthly basis using what already exists in terms of the manager on the board. But that is the opportunity to prepare to take stock of where we're at with the team, and to then, if necessary, adjust the azimuth or indeed increase the horsepower where we can. But that process will run, I think, pretty effectively for that period we've got in place, for the remaining period we have under Claire's leadership. Happy to take questions on that, but that gives you a sense of where we're at.
So the AFIs, the number 4.6.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Heather. And I'm glad you did just ask about the AFIs. I was suddenly thinking, did you ask something before then about something else that I hadn't noted? But it was on 4 and 6. Right. The investigations, AFI, in fact, yeah, kind of Ben touched on this earlier as well, talked to this earlier as well, about the fact that it's a national problem for policing and the response to investigations. No, not satisfied, obviously. And as you can see that, as you pointed to, that's an ongoing in AFI, not one that's in the closure process. And we again talked to the mosaic piece about the root and branch organizational restructuring of investigations to try and actually, because this is a persistent AFI as well, but also in response to the academics findings, to try and look at this, right, where do investigations start? Where do they get stuck? How much time is spent with people developing, going, not my investigation, no, your investigation, kind of the negotiations process and who is actually handling the investigations. Are the right people holding them? Are they, have they got the right level of expertise? Are the complex investigations in the right place? All of this, how much is sitting in response? And actually, are we setting up those police officers to fail or succeed? Because if we're sitting complex investigations with officers that are also response officers, then we're giving them overwhelm and without actually setting on the way the force is structured, without setting them up to succeed. So all of these issues are in sight in that reorganisation piece, the phase 2 of the organisational change programme. So there has to be continuous improvement, a business as usual improvement, but there is also this systems improvement that is looking at standard investigations. But as you can see from this, from a peer inspection point of view, it is ongoing. With the victim's point and the achievement of appropriate outcomes, the appeal process maybe, it has a specific framework of questions and how it operates as with any inspection process. But we've talked to the victims piece before in this meeting as well, and about how much more there is to do on that, and goes to the trauma-informed point, it goes to the communications point, Ben again touched on this earlier, in the immediate connection to the victim when these first touch points are happening, satisfaction level is okay. But it is that ongoing relationship with the victim and that ongoing piece around do they know what's happened with their case? Good or bad? If it's, what's happening in terms of if there are going to be further outcomes, how long do they have to wait to hear that and how is it communicated? All of those pieces, whether or not they're going to be in closure for the AFI, they are in our world. This is in my victims' world, the kind of how victims are being treated. So I'm not going to say it's academic whether appeal outcomes are closed or not, AFIs are closed or not, because it speaks to progress and speaks to some things that have been done. But it is not the only, there's appeal and indeed wider inspections from HMIC FRS are not the only ways. And they're not the only driver of my work in terms of my governance scrutiny and indeed specific areas of priority.
Just keep it on my list. It's on your list. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very conscious we've got one more question from Sibs, but if we can be as succinct as possible because we've got one more substantive item to cover.
That's not possible.
Thank you.
It may have been directed at me, not you.
Oh, yeah. I agree with that one. Yeah, thanks. Just looking at this, I'm going to comment on the three questions. Yeah, just have to set the context. So the comment is on the PCC statements is really the intention of being very balanced with that narrative, because on the 15th of May, Congolese man in Dublin died after being restrained right in the shop centre by security. And it was like a George Floyd situation right in the high street. But that's not in the narrative. That's not in the narrative in a regional, it's not in the narrative in the national. So I think we need to have a balanced approach in communicating public concerns or civil unrest, because it then doesn't paint the right picture or representation-wise. So just please, I think, acknowledging that within what you've acknowledged, we'll put a balanced narrative. Secondly, is when looking at the cohesion strategy and the cohesion work that's been taken on now. You know, I'm in the city centre, I'm in the protests, I'm with my businesses, but none of the actual work and engagement has actually taken place with those residents or with those businesses. It's actually taking place outside where the protests actually take place, which for me is a bit of a skewed approach of the cohesion, and better trying to understand where does that cohesion strategy really sit between retail issues, in terms of high streets, and also in terms of where they happen, and what can the police actually do to better safeguard our high streets, especially in light of the work that you were saying. There's also an appendix of a research document which was blinding for me, and I'd love to see the work that's been done at the back of the impact of organized crime in local communities report, which was done in 2017. An in-depth analysis and scrutiny of the impact of crime. However, I'm hoping that the dashboard that Ben is mentioning actually focuses on some of those organized crime, because starting stats report says only 4% of organized crime is actually linked to map offense. 96% of organized crime is invisible to policing matrix. 96%. 96. Oh my gosh. So if there's a 96% of invisible crime that's happened because it's not immediate crime like you see, it's ongoing crime, but at a deeper level. What are we actually doing about this priority one of strengthening our neighborhood policing? Because that report highlights where deprivation is where the crime is. Where the housing situations are is where this housing is monopolized. Where there's child exploitation and care leavers is where further exploitation is. So it actually highlights a huge strategy of reducing offending, reducing child poverty. It highlights that. But from what I'm seeing and that in-depth analysis, I'm not seeing how we're counteracting that particular narrative. And I'll finish off by saying, on the last part here, you mentioned the workforce. And, you know, the comments around protest and anti-protest coming in and taking our workforce, for me, lies more here. There is, 38% of voluntary resignation in 2024. In 2025, it's 47% workforce voluntary resignation. I'd be interested to understand, where is the exit interviews? What's the feedback that's been highlighted from this element of lack of retention of the staff, because they seem to be living in high numbers and therefore making any element of policing quite challenging for them. Yeah, anywhere. So quality.
My job is now to be concise in responding to all of that, Sis, which is a challenge. Completely take on board your points around the context of what initiated those protests in Belfast, and people were burned out of their homes, so I think they counted a bit more than a protest. So I'm up for adjusting that wording and making that clear. And I will take this opportunity to say what I've said in public in other forums as well, that the whole drive away or references that are being made to two-tier policing, and that being implied post Henry Novak in Southampton that there is disproportionality in the system that impacts against white people, I think is not what the data says. We've talked about anti-racism earlier on today, but the reason that anti-racism work is essential is because that is what the data says, that there are that is where we see the differential treatment. And I could talk for much longer, but in just to respond to recognize Julie's time constraints, I think there was a lot of disinformation and misinformation that followed on from the Henry Novak case. Notwithstanding that incident, there could have been different behaviours. That was not the system's point is not as it's been portrayed in response to that. And of course, we had the incidents in Belfast. More than happy to talk to you around the businesses and how Somerset Police engage with businesses in those protest situations. It's something that I'm very aware of in terms of the impact. And Bristol, as we know, is where this is a particular focus, the impact of those levels of protests that we have. They tend to happen in areas where there are businesses. So more than happy to talk to you more about that. Specifically on the organised crime and that 96%, I need to Ben talk something else around that. What I will say to you is that this is an area of work in terms of, we have this structure right now, the National Crime Agency, the ROCUs and local police forces. And this has been in the police reorganisation, this has been a piece of work that I'm constantly this is an area I'm constantly going back to, because what's driving the work? Because organised crime, exactly as you all talked to, shows up in our communities, shows up on our streets, and that actually, there is so much intelligence that can be gained that then these different levels can see the patterns that can point to the organised crime. And that is something that I talk to, Andy Hill, who's the ACC, who runs the regional organised crime unit, as well as with the PCUs and others, and they're driving up to the NCA, and I'm going to the NCA in September. So all of this this needs to be a two-way flow and not just a top-down dictation of work. Because of that, that tasking needs to come up as well as down in that area. Julie, I'll leave it there, although we can have a conversation.
That's an incredible question to ask at the end of the day, so well done, Sis. And if we can move swiftly on to the final agenda item, and if it helps in terms of introducing it, the panel are really interested around the new additions to it in terms of the Chief Constable.
Yeah. So yes, we have added the standing. We've added the table in about the complaints, the complaints against the Chief Constable as well as the ones coming in against me. You've got the detail in there. We developed the so the panel requested for insurance. You've got the policy that we have developed, in response to sharing how we pick up on that statutory duty. And it improves transparency and accessibility for you and for members of the public. We would welcome any comments that you have on it, and then it will get published on the website. It's allegations received, triaged and recorded, as well as themes to enable oversight. And that will be included in all reports going forward, so you will get that from here on in.
Okay, thank you. I've got Gary with a question.
Yes, thank you for that. It originated from the fact we had a complaint, and the guy who complained alluded to the fact that he might want to challenge the approach to Chief Counsel's review. So we then realised we didn't understand how they were reviewed, and that's as a consequence then of asking you to set it out. So the fact we now set it out is helpful because we can all have that accountability. So that's really helpful. Thank you. We created it this morning, and the only issue that we came back with was whether that chart that you've put in there could just be bolstered with some of the information you already collect. And you kind of allude to that in some of the paragraphs. So, it's putting in perhaps, what the nature of the allegation was and the whether it's upheld or ongoing, just creating a little more of a storyline in the graph. You do try to do that in the paragraph, so it may just be for visualization rather than. And the only other question really to you, Claire, is to what involvement do you have personally with these types of complaints?
I'll take the first part and I'll allude to the second. We'll take the question away and just see what we can disclose that doesn't cause a problem either in policy or a sensitivity perspective. And as you probably picked up on, most of the complaints that come in on Chief Constable effectively are ruled out because either they don't actually directly affect the person or in another way they're not ineligible. But the team are really quite well practiced in understanding and applying policy. Hopefully you get that element of reassurance from what you've got here, as well as actually the sheer quantity being relatively small. What role does Claire play in that? Anything that we think is significant is escalated to Claire's awareness once we've done due diligence on it. And she's kept it in the picture overall. Actually, the team through Sales Directorate do most of the legwork, and indeed either talk to ASB or seek further guidance as appropriate from Home Office or from APCC in terms of looking at specific characteristics of any complaint or to get guidance. So we keep Claire in the picture, but actually she doesn't see them on a routine basis unless she really needs to because of the significance of them or because we think there's a potential conflict there. Is that fair?
Absolutely fair. I did also, kind of following the last panel meeting as well, and this was raised a little long before, I can't remember, but also then, did go away and do a proper look over the last years and what's coming in. And, but it's as a rule. The team are outstanding, and I do trust their judgment on this, and it is something they take very, very seriously. With Carl's direction and Sal, and Sal as well, the commitment Sal has.
I think we were just keen to make sure that we had tight arrangements. So if asked, we can explain it with the appropriate level of detail. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
Yeah, thank you very much. The three asks that we had following the planning session, thank you, two have been covered today in terms of the summary of arrangements and the periodic anonymised reporting. But there was the third ask as well, which we welcome your views on, around the chair and the lead officer panel member being briefed where complaints are potentially serious or pose a reputational issue. Is that something that's been considered?
Where did you bring We will pick that up separately.
Thank you very much. And okay, the date of the next meeting is September 22nd of September. It's back here at 10:30.